Welcome to Follow Me to the MROP, a podcast dedicated to the journey of the masculine soul and the transformative power of initiation. My name is Brian Mueller. I live in suburban Dayton, Ohio, and I made my rites at Pilgrim Park in Illinois in 2014. I'm your host, and in each episode of our show, I'll sit down with one man who has made his rites, and I'll invite him to tell his story. This won't be an abstract explanation or a theological lecture, just a real conversation about what it was like to cross that threshold at the rites and what changed afterward. Before we begin, a quick word of gratitude. This podcast is brought to you by Choosing Presence. We believe that the greatest gift a man can give his community is his own presence. In a world of constant distraction, Choosing Presence provides the tools to help you stay grounded in the now. If you'd like an easy way to begin learning about the practice of presence, you can download the free Practicing Presence app at choosingpresence.org/app. Now, the Men's Rites of Passage, or MROP, is an experience designed to help men move from the first half of life into the second, shifting from a focus on ego and achievement to a life of meaning and soul. On this show, we just don't talk about the rites in theory, we talk to the men who have walked the path. Today, we are joined by a man who has made his rites, and we're going to hear exactly what that journey looked like for him. My guest today is Al Selder. Brother, I'm really glad you're here. Thanks for making the time and for being willing to share your story.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Brian. I was excited to get your email for the invite to have this opportunity. So let's see where this goes.
Yeah. Al, tell us where you're from and how you spend your time these days.
Currently living here in Chandler, Arizona, which is one of the suburbs outside of Phoenix, and been out here since 1981. And so currently I'm a retired engineer and enjoying the time that gives me with my our three grandkids and my wife of almost 46 years. And my kids live out here, obviously with the grandkids being close by. So just enjoying those times. And then also like spending time up in Flagstaff. My brother and us have a house up there, so it's nice to get out of the heat. And so just stay busy kind of locally, doing a little bit of traveling around and different things. But yeah, never a dull moment. That never find myself getting bored.
Now let's dive in and talk about the Men's Rites of Passage. The MROP is a unique experience. It's not a retreat or a workshop, it's an initiation. Many men arrive at the rites at a crossroads in their lives, looking for something they can't quite name. Before we dive into the why and the how, let's start at the beginning. When and where did you make your rites, Al?
So I did my rites of passage in 2005 in Oracle, Arizona, which is a small town northeast of Tucson. At a YMCA camp down there.
And who was the weaver and about how many men were there?
The weaver was Richard Rohr. Richard, this was one of the first MRPs outside of Ghost Ranch. And it was something that was brought on by a group of men that went in 2003, I think, to Ghost Ranch and were just really on fire for the work that Richard was doing, and basically worked out to expand this to have it here in Arizona. And so maybe we'll talk about this a little later about the invitation process on that. But anyways, Richard was the weaver, and let's see, how many men were there? We probably had about 40 or 45 men being initiated. And then they had a support team, to put the event on.
Now, when you think back to that weekend, what's the first image that comes forth for you?
So first, here living in the desert for all these years, but primarily focused on the city area, being out there really had that sense we always hear about having that desert experience. So I think there was a little bit of a mystery there. So the impression initially was, obviously, they didn't know anything about what the event was going to unfold. That was kind of intentional. And so it was just taken by the desert that I was maybe in at that time that I wasn't even aware of, which became very, clearer as the events unfolded for that few days.
Broadly speaking, as you think back over the entire weekend experience, what was that like for you?
I've done a lot of retreats over the years. And as you mentioned in the intro, the MRP is really, even though you're there with a group of men and you're interfacing, it's a unique experience for each individual. And that's really what I found. It was things that welled up in me that I hadn't for many, many years. It was just an opportunity to really do a lot of self-reflection on, where I've been, what I needed to get to release. And it was just, again, I think that was what really impressed me early on. And then having the opportunity to, be in the council circles and home groups, as they were referred to at that time, to be able to kind of open up and process all that was really a unique experience.
And without sharing anything that you might consider too personal or even confidential, was there a particular experience at the rites, or was there a particular encounter with maybe another man or your home group that really stands out to you?
Trying to think back on that. I don't really, the home group experience was very powerful. I don't have any really recollections from that. And maybe we'll get into this a little later, but I definitely had a very profound experience on the day in the desert. So I don't know if that's a further on question or if it's something I should elaborate on.
No, please go ahead and elaborate. Yeah.
So it was really interesting is that we were preparing for that, and Richard had us write some guides down along the way, and I picked some of the obvious ones. I think it was the Pope at that time. I think it was Pope John Paul was still the Pope. I always have an affinity for Saint Joseph as the patron saint of the carpenters and those sorts of things, and many others. But I enjoying woodwork and that myself. I thought, St. Joseph's would be good. And then I had, obviously I had Jesus as one of the guides. But then, there was a fifth one. I said, you know what? I'm going to have my father-in-law, who had passed away several years before, Lou. At the time, I didn't really think much of it. So anyways, I had those guides, and so I had made my way out for that desert experience. And just remembered sitting there and going through the process and those sorts of things. And all of a sudden, I started singing, Que Sera, Sera, whatever it will be, will be. And I go, what the heck am I singing a Doris Day song for? But everything just came to a point of clarity. And I think what really hit me is that, and it was actually having Kathy's dad there, Lou, is that he definitely had a lot of brokenness in his life, and he could really have used this experience and others that I've had over the years with the Lumen and Counsel work and those sorts of things. I just had this strong sense at that point that I needed to continue with this work. And since 2005, up until recently, I have been very involved with the Lumen and the Arizona chapter to make sure this opportunity was available for other men. And even though I'm not actively involved with the Arizona chapter, at this point, I'm still involved in a council group, my council circle myself. I'm very involved in our church. And the interesting thing is, I just found out from my son is that he's interested in forming a council circle. He's talked about wanting to do something like that. He said, I just don't know how to do it. And he's just told me last night that that's something that he feels called to do. And he's been talking to some guys about that. Ironically, 2 weeks ago, was brought up in my council circle that, of his desire to do that, unbeknownst that he was in this process. And so when he brings this up to me last night, I go, you won't believe this. And so when I started this, you wonder, well, what impact are you going to have with this? And I always have felt like, I do this and I bring one man to some sort of a transformative experience where he has changed his life, then I feel like I have accomplished something. And, if we all had that same goal of touching one person and making a difference in their life, we would all be touched. And over the years, I've been blessed with many, men coming and says, hey, that invitation that you had for, to go to the MRP or to do this or that was such a life-changing experience. I felt, okay, I feel like I've accomplished what I set out to do. And I did one little story that that often many people have heard is about the little girl that's going down the beach, and there's all these starfish that have washed up, and she's picking them up and throwing them into the water. And this old man comes by and says, well, what are you doing? He says, I'm throwing these starfish back into the water. And he goes, well, how are you going to make any difference? There's thousands of them out here. She says, it makes a difference for this one. And I just have always remembered that little story. And I think use that as say, yeah, we don't always have to do great things. Sometimes these little things all have some sort of an impact.
Thank you so much for that, Al. What I heard you saying was that the day that you spent in nature at the Men's Rites of Passage, where you were offered the opportunity to invite some guides to go with you out there, and you selected your late father-in-law as one of those guides, that really led you to want to bring this experience to more men.
Yes. Yeah, when the invitation I got was from one of the men that went in that group in 2003, says, just trust me and go. And obviously I did. I didn't know what to expect. So and over the years, again, of doing other types of retreats, I've never had an experience that was so deep as I had from the MRP. I think a lot of it's just the way the whole weekend is structured. So I always tell men, I said, when they're discerning, I said, the way I look at it is you get a point in your life and you just feel like you're stuck. And sometimes we call that a midlife crisis or whatever it is, but you've got so much baggage that you need to sort through. And I say, the MRP is an opportunity to identify that, release it, grieve over it, and then be open to see what you're called to do next. And I think for me, that is how I summarize the experience, is just an opportunity to basically, just get in touch with yourself. We don't give that type of time to ourselves very often. And just to have that time to really do an assessment of where you are, release stuff that's no longer serving you, and then just be open to what's next. I think I followed that path pretty closely in my experience.
So let me take you back a little bit to before you attended the rites. What was going on in your life at the time that you decided to register for the rites, or what made you decide, yeah, this is the experience I want to do?
Well, at that time, I was in a fairly large parish here in Arizona, and we had a very active men's ministry and got involved in that, and just in various roles, throughout the years. And of course, at that time, it was at the peak of my career, a lot of stuff going on with the job, family was growing, and those sorts of things. Can't say there was anything that really specifically said I really needed this event, other than the curiosity and, again, the invitation to just trust and to go through it because of the experience these other men had. And really, I was surprised what came up. So there wasn't any specific thing that I could say, yeah, I was dealing with some maybe addictions or those sorts of things, and I just needed to have this opportunity. But it was more of just an openness and a curiosity. It was also very profound.
When you made the decision to attend and you told your wife, maybe your family, friends, maybe even a spiritual director, what was their reaction?
My wife didn't necessarily completely understand it. In fact, that's still a little bit of a struggle even to this day, some of the men's work. And I try to explain, but she's been to a couple of talks that Richard has done. And I think she doesn't maybe understand why guys need to maybe do this sort of thing. And I think that's one of the things Richard actually talks about, is that men sometimes need this initiation, in the whole male, history is something that has just been missing of late. And that women tend to do this naturally. In fact, we just had this conversation just last night when my son said he wants to get this group together. So.
Yeah. Now, when you went to the rites, did you drive alone or were you with a group from your parish?
I drove down with one other man. A lot of people remember Jim Shear, and Jim and I drove down together, and we drove back together. So I did not go other than with Jim, I did not go with anybody else, from our parish at that time.
Did you and Jim have conversations about the rites, both coming and going, about what you might anticipate?
Not so much going, because I think we both went in with, at that time, and probably still is, yeah, we could have read Adam's Return, and which would have been good, but the invitation was just to go with an open mind and just let the Spirit work. But definitely on the way back, in fact, we were sharing so much of what our experiences was, we missed a turn and we ended up driving 50 miles out of our way.
So when you arrived at Oracle, and the rites began and you entered into the rites, was there something that you were hoping for, something that you wanted to be initiated into?
I was open to what could come up. And it was the affirmation to continue this work. As a matter of fact, one other thing that as I was sitting there in the desert, I had this vision of these quaking leaves and a running stream, and it just kept reoccurring. And so afterwards, I was sharing this with Brad, and he says, that's Aravaipa Canyon. And I said, really? I said, where's that? Didn't know anything about that. Well, he was sharing his story that he was, in his MRP experience, he had the visions of these golden vistas, and he was sharing that with Richard Rohr. And Richard said, oh, that's Aravaipa Canyon. And so we made a trip down there, and I think it was in 2006 timeframe. And as we drove up here, and I saw the Aravaipa Creek, the cottonwood trees lining that's exactly what I saw. So there was a really mystical experience that occurred. So if this background shows up in the podcast, this is the Brandenburg Peak north of the property there at Aravaipa Ranch. And this is what Brad's experience was. There's also this creek that runs right past the ranch that we have done many MLRPs since mine in 2005. And it's just a very, very special place.
I just want to make a note here. You're speaking about Brad Galeras. He's the original convener for the Arizona chapter. He preceded you in that role.
Yes.
Did you meet him at the MROP?
No, I knew Brad actually from our common ties with the men's ministry at the parish we were both attending. And once we had this, we realized actually it was post the same time frame, a group formed in Arizona, and we became one of the first chapters that were continuing to do the work of, Richard in doing subsequent MRPs here in Arizona. And we've done them. The last one we did was in 2024. And so we've done, probably a dozen of events down here, and each one unique and each one very special.
Now, it sounds to me like you went into the MROP in a very open-minded way and open-hearted way, which I think is wonderful. Did you have any fear? Anything that you were nervous about?
No, not really. I think because I had, been doing a lot of other men's work and stuff like that, I just read this is just another stepping stone. So I didn't really have any fears or trepidations going into it. Again, I think part of it is I did trust Brad and others that had went, and I just said, okay, I'll just be open, see what happens.
Now, when the rites ended, you were at Oracle for a few days, and it was time for you to drive off. You and Jim got in the car, and presumably you eventually got home, but after the wrong turn. But how did you feel immediately after the rites?
One of the things that is brought up is, again, the stories that we share, obviously, we keep to ourselves, and the insights that says, don't share your gold too soon. And I took that to heart, and I really didn't know where this was going to end up going. And it wasn't until, again, late 2006 or so, where I started getting more involved in moving out of the ministry work at the church into doing this with the chapter here in Arizona. And so it just was something that it wasn't 100% sure where it was going to end up. But looking back at it now, it's been a wild ride.
Well, Al, since making your rites, what has changed in your life for practically, relationally, spiritually?
I think the big thing is just seeing the value. One of the things that has evolved from the MRP is that the event in of itself is very powerful. And, when you're ready for it, it's a great stepping stone. I think men gathering in council and sharing their stories on a regular basis and hold each other up. And I can cite many things that have occurred in my life where having these brothers shoulder to shoulder have made a huge difference. I think now we're referring to that as the journey of illumination. And so the MRP is just one part of that, but it is a journey, and it's a lifelong commitment. And I don't feel I would be who I am today had I not had that initial experience and then the continuing time meeting with my brothers on a weekly basis. We've been doing this, for many, many years. And so I think that's really the big takeaway of it is you got to take, it's not something you just check off and do. There's got to be something. And even Richard mentions to be generative. You have, to give back in some manner. And I think that's really what says, what can I do and give back? So again, one of the affirmations I just had yesterday is that, my son, who we used as a guinea pig for a lot of the stuff we were trying to do here in Arizona, took a lot of this stuff to heart. And just now that he's well into his career and stuff in his mid-30s, he's seeing, hey, I need this. I need this I've seen what it's done for you. I've had some experiences myself, and I want to now take this on it and feel very grateful for that.
How did the rites affect your relationships, specifically, your personal relationships, your relationships with other men in your community, and how did that affect also the conversations you would have with others?
I think the big thing is, as I mentioned earlier, is that what can I do to provide these experiences for other men? And I know for me, everybody has different gifts that they have. And one of the things I realized too is that the group of men that we ended up forming in our chapter here, we all had different gifts and different backgrounds. And in a secular world, if you will, we probably never would have connected. But in this work, we had that common goal. So we all brought different things to that. And so my drive was I tended to be the one working in the background on the organizational side of things. And so I always had the goals. What can I do to create the environment that this transformative work can take place? And so I was looking to make sure there was, just the creature comforts were taken care of so that wouldn't be a distraction, so that the men that would come to these events could do the work that they came to do without worrying about, what they're going to eat or where they're going to sleep and all those sorts of things. So that's really where I kind of felt my calling. As far as, me personally, this question has come up before. It says, well, where would I be today had I not done this? And quite frankly, I'm not sure. It would have probably been different, but I think as a whole, I don't regret any of this. And I think it's made me a more compassionate person. There's been other things that have come up that have realized that, hey, I'm just not an island. I definitely need other men, other people around me to get to where I need to go. And so there's definitely been some humbling experiences that have come out of this. And so it's really hard to say what distinctly has changed. There's not been any major aha moment like this. It's just been a slow, gradual transition.
Now, let me ask you, did the rites change your understanding of masculinity, initiation, or the male purpose in life? And if so, how did they change?
In the early part in my, 20s, just starting my career, the interfaces you had, most of the conversations tend to be fairly shallow. And I think what this experience has shown me is that it's okay to open up to others, especially another group of men. But what's important is to gain trust and to allow yourself to become vulnerable. And I think that's the key thing that I think, again, that's one of the things that really drove Richard to do this, is that guys would have a tendency to bottle things up. I thought I was kind of open, but I think I was never getting to that level where I could really get into any issues that might be coming up. So that's the sharing of your stories, but listening to other men's stories, because there's so much that can be learned from what others are going through. And some of you can just relate to and say, yeah, I kind of went through that too. And it's good to hear how others have done that. And so in your normal work life, social life, what have you, you don't get into those sorts of things. And I think it's necessary to really be a whole person to sort through that. I think a lot of the issues with depression and addictions and those sorts of things are just because the guys don't have that intimate contact and things within either their church community or whatever. And so I think this is a valuable, for me anyway. I don't think I'd be where I am today without it. But as the question you asked earlier, I can't pinpoint any specific things that has changed. I think as a whole, I'm sure I'm different than I would have been had I not done this.
Yeah, Al, thank you. I hear you saying that there's a depth of relationship and even the ability to be more vulnerable in your relationships. Let me shift a little bit here and let me talk a little bit about Aravaipa. I just want to say, years ago, after I made my rites, I was not tethered to any one place, and I spent some time out in Arizona, and I found your council group in the Phoenix area to be very welcoming to me, and the community that you and others have created to be just wonderful. And you invited me to a retreat that spring at Aravaipa Canyon. And Aravaipa Canyon Ranch is also where the MROP is hosted. Can you tell us a little bit about why Aravaipa is such a sacred place for so many men in the Limin community, and describe that a little bit?
So as I mentioned, in my time in the desert there during the MRP, I had that vision of the flickering leaves and the running water. And you don't find that in a lot of places in Arizona, let alone it be year round. So, Aravaipa Creek water runs year round. So as we learned a little bit more about this ranch and the owner, David Riker, he had a connection with Richard years ago when he bought the ranch, and Richard came out initially, blessed the site. And there was a particular area on there that they really were drawn to. Some of the history of Aravaipa ranch, or of the Aravaipa area, is that there's a lot of the Native Americans were very prevalent in this area. In fact, I don't tell this story as well as others, but I guess I think it was Geronimo was actually in this holdup in the Aravaipa area. But one of the tragic things that happened is during some of the wars that occurred in the early part of our nation, is that there was a massacre in this whole Aravaipa area. And so there's a spiritual connection, very strong spiritual connection here with what has happened. And so there was, David had this desire to have this retreat center set up. And so he has this ranch house that can accommodate up to 30 people. And so when we decided to do the MRPs there, we realized that, we're going to have to expand it. And so one of the things that I think was interesting is when we were looking, we had to set up a tent area for the meeting space. As we were looking for a spot, we gleaned in the field to have this one area. It turns out that is the area that Richard felt this very strong connection. I think one of the draws at Aravaipa is that spiritual connection to the land, to the history, to the people that were there before, the magnificent views. It just had all the elements that you would want to have for the quote desert experience. And so we become very connected there. And every time we go down there, it's just like we're entering, and we talk a lot of times in this work of the liminal space. And so it's just like we're entering into this. It almost doesn't matter what's happening outside. We enter into this, and there's just a peace that comes over everybody. And so when we plan these events, and I think this is true probably for everybody that does these MRPs, you do all this planning, but things never tend to work out the way you plan, but they work out exactly the way they're supposed to. And so we finally just kind of laugh with it when things go different directions as well. So we now, as we enter into the space, we says, okay, go to the Holy Spirit. It's all up to you now. And we just kind of go with the flow. And that this place really makes that, it's magical. If opportunities come up, definitely invite anybody to go down in this, to the Aravaipa area.
Thank you, Ron. I'd like to invite you to say a little bit more about the MROP from your many years of experience. I was so fortunate to be able to volunteer to help support the MROP at Aravaipa in 2024. And one of the things I always like to tell guys is that's the best food you'll ever have at an MROP. Your cooking staff does a great job. Of course, I was fasting during the MROP, so I missed out on a lot of it, but I just think it's such a wonderful location, the opportunity for men to sleep outdoors as part of the event. But those are just some personal reflections. I really want you, because you had so many events at Aravaipa, many MROPs, but also many other retreats and things like that. Let's talk a little bit about the depth and breadth of your experience in men's work, illuminate men's work specifically, and where that's led you.
Again, as I first, got initiated in 2005, got involved in helping out with various events, and then we really had we had the first two MRPs in Oracle in 2005 and 2007. It was at a YMCA camp, and it was very nice, and they took really good care, but we just felt like there was just something missing. And so that's, as I mentioned earlier, as I was, reflecting that time out in the desert, I just had this strong sense of this place with the running water and the flickering leaves. And when I went out here, we, saw this and said, this is the place, this is where we need to do this. And so we found the ranch and we got connected with David. And the history of the ranch was it was built in the 60s by a Seventh-day Adventist minister. It was right, by the creek. It was, pretty basic, but at least it was had some of amenities that would be useful for doing an event. So I had, kitchen, couple stoves, a few refrigerators. And we realized if we were going to do an event there, there's no catering service that we could probably get to come out. There's no grocery store nearby. And so probably one of the most difficult things to make this work is the kit. You mentioned the food. And so the first part of my involvement out there is I was managing the kitchen. And so it came up with a process to get everything put together for that. And that was quite an undertaking. In fact, I ended up writing a guide on doing this for any other chapters that were going to do an MRP where they had to provide their own food, because it adds a whole different level of complexity when you have to add that element, because it's necessary that provide food over those days. And so that was probably the biggest challenge, but I've always enjoyed food prep, and this, rather than just preparing for a small group or the family. In fact, one year, I think it was in 2016, we had 92 men at Aravaipa. And so we had men, about 30 in the houses. We had tents set up all over the property. It was quite a transformation from this ranch to almost a small city. I still don't know how we pulled that off, but it was really quite an experience. And so as time went on, I just took on more and more responsibility, eventually became the MRP coordinator for the event. So I had to build a team to do all the things, including the kitchen, and then eventually became the convener for Arizona, as long with still managing the MRPs. It was just like the little stepping stones along the way. But again, I think the big thing is that we wanted, when we found this place, and the feelings that we had and the subsequent, events that we've had there, it's remember I mentioned that one of the goals is to create an environment for transformation and take place. This is that place.
This is the year that Illumina is celebrating the 30th anniversary of the very first rites of passage that Father Richard gave at a ghost ranch in New Mexico. And as someone who's been involved in this work for many years and through many iterations, including Illumina, what hopes do you have for the future of the MROP?
I'd certainly like to see those continue. Due to many factors, we didn't do one here in 2026, but I think the work needs to continue. But I think, again, I know there's been a shift to really make sure that men can, beyond the event itself, need to stay engaged. And so I know there's been a real push to really further what they would call the journey of illumination, of connecting and serving and all those sorts of things. And I think the connection element is one of the keys. Is guys need to connect with others to share their stories and to hear the stories. This day and age, we get so distracted with social media and all those other things that we've almost, in a sense, been isolating ourselves. I mean, it's a real issue with some of our young people. This needs to always be available as a healing experience for whatever is needed. As unlike other retreats, as mentioned earlier, this is a unique experience for each person. So there may be 40 or 50 men that are being initiated. It's a unique event for each one of them. They're all going to leave with something different.
Thank you. I have just one more question for you. And we've now started what I call MROP season here as we get into the late spring and summer months. And so the very first men's rites of passage actually began yesterday in Northern California. And that'll be the first rites that happens this year. I'd like you to extend an invitation. I'm hoping that other men will be listening to this and be considering participating in men's rites of passage. What would you say to a man urging him to participate in a men's rites of passage?
when I get a call or if I run into a man that I think is struggling in some manner, and I think this could be a good experience, is usually what I ask on an invitation says, have you found yourself in a point in your life that you kind of feel stuck? You're well into your career, other things are going on, or maybe some things that you're struggling with, but you don't know how to really deal with it. And a lot of it is there's all this excess baggage is what I lot. And I said, what this event will help you do is to sort through that baggage, release it, grieve over it, and then open yourself up to what the possibilities are. And just to go with that mindset. So if you feel like that, yeah, I'm stuck at this point, and I really need a way to kind of reset in some manner, I think the MRP could be a very positive experience. I know when Richard set this up, it's a second half of life thing. So this is like after in your 40s and what have you. And the majority of men that do attend tend to be in their, probably 40s, 50s, and 60s and older. But we sometimes have some young men that have had some really strong, had some life experiences that they need to sort with. So I think a lot of it is an invitation process is to get to know where a man is in his journey. And because you've experienced the MRP yourself and you know what you went through, you can help share a little bit about your story. But again, and then as I was invited, hey, trust me, it was a great experience for me. I think it'll be a great experience for you. Just do it.
Thank you so much, Al. I was looking forward to this conversation for a long time, even though we just made plans for this just in the last 24 hours or so. But you and the men in Arizona really exemplified to me what it means to be generative and supportive and really create these opportunities for men to experience the rites and transformation in just an awesome setting. So just wonderful to hear about your experience. I just want to say I love you, brother. And, I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. And who knows where the journey will be taken us, because it is indeed a journey. And this is just a small step along the way.
For those listening who are now feeling a tug in their own soul and are curious to learn more, allow me to share a bit about the history of these rites. The men's rites of passage was originally developed by Father Richard Rohr and was first offered at Ghost Ranch, New Mexico in 1996. While it was supported for many years by the Center for Action and Contemplation, since 2012, Illumin has been the steward of this work, preserving and adapting the rites for men all over the world. To learn more about the history and the theology behind this work, I highly recommend reading Adam's Return by Richard Rohr. If you are ready to make your rites, there are 4 opportunities in the United States and another in the United Kingdom in 2026. The first is in Northern California, May 13th through the 17th. The second in the United Kingdom, July 22nd through the 26th. And in Illinois, August 12th through the 16th. There's one on the East Coast in New Jersey, September 16th through the 20th. And the final one of the year is in Texas, which is in MROP and Umbrales, our Spanish language rites, September 30th through October 4th. You can find details and registration information at illumin.org/MROP or illumin.org/events. Additionally, mark your calendars for Awaken, the annual national gathering of Illumin, taking place November 5th through the 8th in New Mexico. You can find more at illumin.org/awaken. Finally, a special thank you to our sponsor, Choosing Presence. If today's conversation moved you, I encourage you to bring more intentionality into your daily life. Download the Practicing Presence app for free at choosingpresence.org/app. It's a simple but profound way to stay connected to the journey we've discussed today. Thank you for listening to Follow Me to the MROP. Until next time, brothers, stay present.